Welcome, good night, everyone. We are streaming live. This is ID Living Conversations. I'm Julian Catari, and I get to speak every week with a very enlightening woman named Secret Blue Heron Woman, who's with us, and we'll be sharing this story this week about the cancer industry. This thing that we cannot call it anything else because it's that simple. And we're going to give you details and data about how this is simply the truth, what's happening with this specific industry. So, welcome everyone, and that's today's topic. So let's get into how did how did it begin? Was there like some type of initial, I don't know,
It
is it
began
is
with
it
it
is it
began
really
with Rothschild starting
population
the not
production?
Rothschild, Rockefeller. One of the Rockefellers starting the American Medical Association by selling quote snake oil, which caused cancer in people. But um, one thing we need to remember is that there is not one symptom of dis-ease or unwellness that we have ever had or have that is caused. It's not caused by a prescription drug deficiency or chemotherapy deficiency. There's not one symptom of disease that is caused that we've ever had that was caused by a prescription drug deficiency or chemotherapy deficiency.
Hmm. Yeah.
We need to let that sink in because that's the first thing we do when we have a symptom is we go seek prescription drugs. It's not
Healthy.
it's not caused by a deficiency of that thing we're seeking.
Right. That's I've heard that argument plenty of times. That's because this I have this chemical deficiency. Oh, okay.
No. So why do we go seeking this out? Because we're programmed to,
Right.
right? We're domesticated to do this.
Yeah.
So it's been nearly 50 years or more since the war on cancer was declared, and yet more people are diagnosed with cancer and dying from cancer, so to speak, than ever before. What we're not told, though, is that no one actually dies of cancer. They die of the toxins put into them to kill the cancer. After spending $500 billion on cancer research since 1970, the cancer establishment has come up with nothing. After spending $500 billion on cancer research since 1970, the cancer establishment has not yet come up with anything useful preventing or curing it.
Mm.
So if that's true, then they are either incompetent and have a spectacular failure, or if it's true and they have cures or effective treatments and have suppressed them, then their actions are criminal in nature.
They are totally criminal.
So up until this point, in our pursuit to end cancer, our primary mistake has been entrusting the same people who profit from treating cancer to provide us with a cure. Why? Well, there's no money in a cure. Why would an industry that generates over $125 billion a year put itself out of business?
Yeah. That's one of the obvious logics. That's you try to get rid of that evidence, right?
The American Cancer Society estimates that almost half of everybody alive today will develop cancer at some point in their lives. And the WHO, the World Health Organization, predicted that before 2020, there would be a 50% rise in cancer diagnosis by 2020. So what is fueling this explosion? Well, number one, surgery. A surgeon's first instinct when he sees a patient with a tumor is to reach for his scalpel and carve it out of them, his or her. So, however, removal of a tumor isn't simply a local phenomenon with no other biological consequences. Although surgical removal of a tumor is widely accepted today as beneficial and necessary, it was not so long ago that the prevailing public attitude towards tumor resection was so disapproving and hostile that it's difficult to imagine. Paracelsus in the 15th century wrote, "It should be forbidden and severely punished to remove cancer by cutting, burning, and other fiendish tortures." And we think they were so primitive back then. So whether you've been cut by somebody stealing your wallet in the city or by a surgeon on an operating table because you gave him or her your wallet, the act of cutting into the body is traumatic and inflicts damage, period. The rapid rise of cancer surgery is best illustrated by the early history of what is now called the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. A 19th century woman doctor was the spiritual founder of the center. He received a very brief medical training before he began performing surgery. While some tattoo artists developed their skills by practicing on the skin of pigs or grapefruits, this guy began his training on a group of slave women from the southern United States. In a makeshift hospital behind his house, he began dozens of experimental procedures on the women. Some of them received as many as 30 operations in a 4-year period. After he felt he was ready to move on, his last name is Sims. Sims moved to New York City, where he founded the Women's Hospital, which still exists today. He developed a select clientele of wealthy women to finance him and European immigrants, upon which he continued to perform large numbers of experimental surgeries. Then his lady managers became convinced that the lives of all the patients in the institution were being threatened by mysterious experiments, so they expelled him, but then they reinstated him. And in 1884, he went on to establish the first private cancer hospital in the United States, the New York Cancer Hospital, now known as Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. So this is what the industry is based on: a kook who operated on slave women without anesthesia, experimentally. So this is the history of cancer surgery, and we want to continue this. So the four most common cancer surgeries are the commando, the Whipple, the total extenteration, and the hemicorporectomy. And I know every single last one of those. I was working at University Hospital in Colorado while I was in nursing school, and I saw every single. I saw the results of every single last one of these surgeries. It's not pretty. So the commando was and still is being performed on patients who have been diagnosed with tongue cancer. And this surgery involves moving half their face, right? Half their face, gone. The commando derived its wide acceptance from the fact that it brought to mind the slashing attack of the World War I commandos. So that's a procedure. It's called a commando. You have you get diagnosed with oral surgery, you're going to get half your face removed. Bottom line, if you follow your surgeon's advice.
Okay.
The Whipple was a type of cancer surgery developed for the treatment of pancreatic cancer by the president of the American Surgical Association and clinical director at Memorial Hospital, Dr. Whipple, of course. This ghastly surgery involved the removal of many organs adjacent to the affected gland on the theory that they must be harboring nests of cancer cells. I've seen the results of the Whipple. It's probably the patients probably had the highest success rate of going home 3 months after this surgery. So you have the surgery, you're in the hospital for 3 months minimum. Total exenteration. In 1948, a doctor invented this operation called the total exenteration. This procedure involves the removal of all the following: the rectum, the stomach, the bladder, part of the liver, the ureters, all internal reproductive organs, the pelvic floor and wall, the pancreas, the spleen, the colon, and lots of blood vessels. He called it a brutal and cruel procedure. So basically, what the exenteration does is you go in and it cleans out everything in your body cavity. Done, gone.
Okay.
Now you have a colostomy, you have a urostomy, you pee and poop in a bag, and your life is done.
Yeah.
These patients usually had about 6 months in the hospital and then they died.
Okay. You got to see them?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I was a nurse's aide on the general surgery floor. I witnessed the results of all of these procedures, all of
Oh,
them.
wow.
Yes.
Wow.
So the
Okay.
hemicorporectomy, the fourth most common cancer, these are all still being done, was developed by a doctor for the treatment of bladder or pelvic malignancy. This surgery involves the amputation of everything below the pelvis. This one I did not see. So basically, it means cutting off everything. It means you have no life. You only have half a body, literally, if you agree to this one, the hemicorporectomy. And they're still promoting it. So what's the astounding thing of these 4 surgeries? All of them are still being performed and none of them have been banned. An Australian surgeon has written the effectiveness of medicine is overestimated by those who are making the decisions and the harms are underestimated. The doctors that sell are overestimating the benefits and underestimating the harms. The way to correct that is to make the doctors be more scientific about what they do and to educate the public to be more scientific about what they'll have done to them. So the most important question to ask your doctor is, what evidence do you have that doing this procedure to me is better than not doing it?
Yeah, okay. That's, yeah, we could ask questions,
Yeah.
right? It's like,
Yeah,
okay,
questions
thanks.
need to be asked. What evidence do you have that this is better? Because 99% of these guys that are doing this would say they would never do it. They would never
The,
have it done to themselves, but they want to make money.
okay.
So therefore,
Wow.
they are committing crime, and we allow them to commit crime.
And we pay them to do
We
it.
pay
Yeah.
them to. We pay big bucks to have them do this to us. So common sense ought to tell us that if a surgical procedure isn't needed, it shouldn't be performed. Some studies estimate that as many as 30% of certain surgeries are performed unnecessarily. And in 1995, a report concluded that nearly 60% of all surgeries performed are medically unnecessary. And that number is actually very low. Let's say that again. 60% of all medical surgeries are unnecessary, and that number is actually low. So to whoever's listening, if you ever go in and your doctor recommends surgery, run like hell because it's probably not medically necessary.
Hmm.
And
Okay, you heard
American,
that, right? No, they got to write that down because that's, I mean, you can say that easily, but man, somebody to believe that still, I mean, even if it's so evident,
yeah,
that system is so embracing, so it's like so hard to, it's so religious. I don't know, it's hard to doubt it, hard to just dare to maybe see that it's maybe that way, where,
yeah,
it's doing bad, not good.
right, yeah.
But no, can we dare and attempt to see that? No, can't be happening.
So an American pediatrician says that somewhere around 90% of surgery is a waste of time, energy, money, and life. 90%. Now we're up as high as 90%. The waste of money, time, energy, and life. A 2016 review of the latest research on unnecessary surgery states that worldwide every year, millions of people go under the knife, and many of them are enduring great pain and shelling out thousands of dollars for surgeries they don't really need. And that's how my Army nurse anesthesia career ended, because I stopped a surgeon from doing surgery on a patient who didn't really need it. He was just going to practice. That's all it was. It was an Army hospital, a white surgeon, and a poor, simple-minded black man.
Oh. Okay.
And I lost my career over that, but that's okay. So, one of the most common and expensive surgeries performed in America today is coronary artery bypass graft, or cabbage.
Okay.
The truth is that bypasses are the single most commonly performed unnecessary surgery. They're the single most commonly performed, but yet unnecessary surgery in the country. And they cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. The first ever clinical trial on coronary artery bypass graft surgery was published in the Lancet, a British journal, in 1977. And it compared heart disease patients who underwent bypass surgery with ones who received drug treatment only. The results of this showed that survival at 4 years out was only 3% higher in those who underwent higher. So they survived. There's not enough difference. 3% is nothing. The survival rate was 3% higher for those who underwent surgery. And cabbage surgeries, they crack your chest open. You're in the hospital for 6 to 8 weeks after that. Of course, now they're pushing you out sooner, but your recovery time is 6 to 8 weeks of feeling like shit, feeling like you're at death's door. That's the cold, hard truth of it. Because you just had your chest cavity cracked open brutally.
Okay.
And you only have a 3% higher chance of surviving than if you just did drugs only.
Okay.
Studies done since then have shown the same thing. What have they shown? That having the surgery doesn't give any greater effect than drug therapy does. A 2016 study asked 101 U.S. hospitals what they charge for coronary artery bypass surgery, and of the 53 hospitals that responded, the average cost of the procedure was $151,271. So basically $151,300. Some were only $44,824, and others topped at a $500,000. The study found no evidence to suggest that hospitals that charge higher prices provide better quality of care. So, as it turns out, cracking open people's chests and dicing up their arteries remains a treasured source of income for surgeons, while patients end up broken and no healthier than they were before the procedure. So, that's coronary surgery, that's heart surgery. Now, how about cancer surgery? The most comprehensive study ever taken on the efficacy of cancer surgery to date was conducted in 1844 by a doctor in Paris. After studying 2,781 cancer patients over a 30-year period who had undergone either surgery or caustics, which would be chemotherapy, right, or no treatment at all, he found that the average survival of patients following the surgery was only 1 year and 5 months. Remarkably, 2 years after cancer diagnosis, those who refused both surgery and the caustics had a 50% higher rate of survival. So you're going to survive if you don't do anything. And we have already talked about this. Recent research has validated his pioneering work, showing that cutting out a tumor either provides no benefit to patients or it increases their mortality, the risk of death. Cancer metastasis is the primary cause of most cancer deaths, and yet the vast majority of us remain almost completely unaware that surgical removal of a tumor has been known to cause cancer metastasis for over 100 years. In 1910, researchers implanted tumors into mice, and when they found that when they left the tumors alone, metastasis or growth or spreading of it did not occur. But when they completely cut out the tumors, the cancer started spreading elsewhere. In 1974, a doctor in Illinois had conducted studies that found out that 10 of our patients underwent an unsuccessful attempt by a surgeon to remove a tumor. All surgeons know this is usually followed by an increased growth of the tumor, and metastasis develops commonly after taking out the tumor, that you didn't get all of it. So they know it, but they need the money. They want the money of doing the surgery. So they're not going to tell their patients that, hey, you know, if I cut into your tumor and I don't get all of it, you're going to die in a year and 5 months. Because if they told their patients that, nobody would have the surgery. They couldn't make their payment on their yacht and their Maserati and their Lamborghini. And he also stated, in 1979, a study done by a German professor provided evidence that surgery, tumor, and palpation or feeling or biopsy and surgery results in a sudden increase of the number of tumor cells released into the blood circulation. He also stated that about 90% of patients who die from metastasis, or of patients who die from metastasis or secondary tumors. And so it should be of great concern to therapists as well as patients that already more than 30 years ago, it was conclusively shown that cancer surgery is the main cause of the metastasis of cancer. It spread because of cancer surgery. He also said that this research was completely ignored by doctors, and since it was just too awful to contemplate, the patients would never get to know about it. So since 1996, doctors have been investigating the physiological mechanisms behind surgically induced cancer metastasis. In a 2010 review of their work, they stated that tumors are not in continuous growth as we once thought. Imagine that. Instead, they undergo periods of dormancy where they're sitting harmlessly, and so surgery to remove the primary tumor often terminates the dormancy, resulting in accelerated relapses of cancer. Furthermore, surgical removal of lymph nodes, which is a standard practice following tumor removal for breast and skin cancer, was found in 2015 to increase the growth of the primary tumor and associated blood vessels, as well as it promoted cancer metastasis. So I think we're getting the picture. The area surrounding the tumor is called the microenvironment and is one of the most important areas of cancer research. Its significance stems from the fact that substances present within this microenvironment are in constant contact with the cancer cells and can determine the fate of the tumor. So if we look at each individual factor found within the microenvironment, we can pinpoint many of the ways cancer surgery promotes the growth and spread of cancer. One of the substances in the microenvironment is nitric oxide. Anytime a tissue has been injured, nitric oxide and other growth factors are released to signal cells to grow and divide to replace the lost cells. In a person with cancer, tumor cells caught in the crossfire of nitric oxide signaling will also be signaled to grow, which is why nitric oxide is a well-known tumor of or promoter of tumor progression. It's also been demonstrated to trigger the stickiness of circulating tumor cells onto body tissues, the first step in new tumor formation. And there's one medication that men are jumping at taking that is exclusively nitric oxide, and that is Viagra.
Okay.
Anytime you're going to take Viagra, you're going to give yourself cancer. It's a given.
Really? Ooh, okay.
People with cancer have higher cortisol levels than people without cancer. Cortisol is a stress hormone. The presence of cortisol in the bloodstream leads to increased production of the hormone estrogen. In the 1990s, a Women's Health Initiative study tested the effects of supplemental estrogen on women and was forced to stop early after participants began developing cardiovascular disease, stroke, dementia, and cancer from estrogen. Stress increases serotonin production. Most of us are told, in fact, Dr. Viold, my shamanic teacher, has said over and over that serotonin is a happy hormone. There's so many big gurus out there that are telling you serotonin is a happy hormone. This cultural belief is misguided because serotonin is not a hormone, and while lowering it alleviates the depression, it's part of the body's stress response, and it promotes tumor growth. Are we getting a picture of how even spiritual gurus are misleading us? So there's a protein in our body that signals immune system activation in response to injury. Overexpression of it promotes inflammation and metastasis of cancer. It is actually very much central to cancer. So surgical removal of a tumor triggers the release of an assortment of substances that each play a role in cancer growth, progression, and metastasis. So therefore, not only does cancer surgery promote the growth and spread of cancer, but all forms of surgery. So it's not just cancer surgery, it's all forms of surgery promote the growth and spread of cancer, even in people who don't have cancer.
Okay.
Chemotherapy. We'll talk about that next. The cancer treatment in which highly toxic chemicals are injected into patients in an attempt to kill cancer cells. The first chemotherapeutic agent ever used, and is still being used to this day, is a derivative of the chemical weapon mustard gas used in World War II. The U.S. learned a lot about mustard gas during World War II, where damaged bone marrow and lymph tissues seen in autopsies of exposed soldiers revealed that the weapon's prime target was the immune system. The U.S. government then conducted a series of secret tests with mustard gas on 60,000 of its troops and broke the story in 2015. 4,000 were used in extreme tests that the government studies have linked to skin cancer, leukemia, and chronic breathing problems. The test subjects were sworn to secrecy until the program was declassified in 1993. By then, the youngest World War II veterans were in their 60s and 70s. So while mustard gas has been banned on the battlefield by international treaties, instead of leaving this poison behind us as a dark remnant of our past, the pharmaceutical companies decided to start injecting it into sick people with cancer. Let's get that straight. It's been banned on the battlefield, but not banned in the hospital.
That doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. After World War II, The US DoD funded Yale University researchers to administer mustard gas to rats and observe its effects on tumors. The tumors regressed, which means the tumor shrunk. So they tested it on a human with advanced lymphoma, and that human tumors also regressed. They were so amazed with this tumor regression that they didn't care. They didn't care that the rat and the human died within 60 days after the treatment. All they cared about was that, oh my God, the mustard gas causes regret, that it causes the tumor to shrink. Doesn't matter that our patient died within 60 days of their tumor shrinking. They had no life. It just, so while it's been banned on the battlefield, we're going to use it in hospitals. At the same time, an American doctor was famous for his nutritional approach to cancer, which included fresh fruits and vegetable juices, liver extract injections, thyroid hormone, coffee enemas, and other nutrients. And he presented cases to the U.S. Congress of cancer patients that had healed using his nutritional therapy. They don't care. There's no money in that. The world of medicine was at a fork in the road now. It could have gone toward natural treatments. But because of that tumor response in one human that lasted for 60 days, the entire chemotherapy industry came into fruition. What is the reason? Profit above all else. So let's talk about the cold hard facts of chemotherapy versus cancer. It shouldn't take more than common sense to reason that injecting poison into the veins of a sick person will, one, not cure them, and two, probably make their health worse. Mm-hmm. Really? Go figure that. A study published in 1980 found that 78 patients who received chemo, survival was no better than of the 80 who did not receive chemotherapy. Furthermore, the regression of tumors, the shrinking of tumors, was found to have no impact on survival, and that survival had been shortened in the chemotherapy patients. The most comprehensive review ever conducted on the efficacy of chemotherapy was completed by a German epidemiologist, and it was published in 2004. He sent letters to over 350 medical centers across the world. His review consisted of thousands of studies and took 2 years to complete. He pronounced that despite new and increasingly expensive poisons being used during chemotherapy, patients do not live a day longer than they did 25 years ago without these new and expensive poisons. He said that the worldwide chemotherapy success rates were appalling, and that for most internal cancers, no proof exists that chemotherapy increases life expectancy or improves the quality of life. He estimated that at least 80% of chemotherapy administered throughout the world is completely worthless. 80% of chemotherapy is completely worthless. So we're allowing ourselves to make our doctors wealthy. Why? Why are we so eager to do this? A group of Australian scientists published a study suggesting that far more than just 80% of chemotherapy is worthless. During a follow-up with cancer patients 5 years after receiving the chemotherapy, the researchers determined that only 2.1% of patients in the US and Australia were still alive. At 5 years after chemo, only 2.1% of the people who received chemo were still alive. This means that chemotherapy has a 98% failure rate.
Yeah, that's good. That's good for nothing.
Seeking a greater understanding of what happens inside the body after an injection of chemotherapy, scientists from Harvard tested 88 of the currently used chemotherapy drugs on fruit flies in 2013. I have yet to understand how they can work with fruit flies. They're so freaking small. Anyway, in 2013, they tested 88 of the, can you imagine this? There's 88, more than 88 chemo drugs. More than 88.
Okay.
They tested them on fruit flies. They found that chemotherapy that stops fast-growing tumors have the opposite effect on stem cells in the same animal, causing them to divide too rapidly. So by shrinking the initial tumor mass, chemotherapy deceives doctors into thinking patients are benefiting from the treatment when actually the growth and spread of cancer are being accelerated by it, because the stem cells, the baby cells, are there to stop the cancer, but the chemotherapy makes them divide more rapidly and turns them into cancer cells.
Okay. So
For the first time, what?
It straight up gives you cancer. I mean, the chemotherapy gives you the cancer. Yeah.
Gives you cancer. Yeah. For the first time ever, researchers investigated chemotherapy-induced death at a number of hospitals in the UK, and the study found that 8.4% of people undergoing chemo for lung cancer and 2.4% of the people treated for breast cancer were killed within 30 days of administration. At another hospital, they discovered that 50.9% of lung cancer patients were killed by chemotherapy within 30 days of treatment. So the longest surviving breast cancer patient of all time was diagnosed at age 45. She did nothing, and she lived until she was 93 years old. Well, she did nothing for 22 years. So following her diagnosis, she received no treatment for 22 years, at which point metastatic cancer in her lungs was found, and they put her on estrogen-inhibiting drugs. 14 years later, they found cancer on her spine and put her on a different estrogen inhibitor. 10 years later, they found cancer in her liver and finally decided to try chemotherapy. Okay, so 45, she was diagnosed with cancer. She lived for 22 years longer, and they found metastatic cancer in her lungs. So now she's what, 45 plus 22 is 67, right? They put her on estrogen inhibiting drugs. 14 years later, so what, 67 plus 14? 81. They found cancer on her spine. 10 years later, 91, they found it in her liver. So she agreed to try chemo, and 2 years later, she was dead.
Okay.
So most patients die of chemotherapy, not cancer. I would say that all patients die of chemotherapy, not cancer. Chemotherapy does not eliminate breast, colon, or lung cancers. This fact has been documented for over 2 decades, and yet doctors still use chemotherapy for these tumors. Said Dr. Alan Levin. He said that. I've seen my punctuation is interesting here. So another doctor said that doctors who use chemotherapy are guilty of premeditated murder. Shall I say that again? Doctors who use chemotherapy are guilty of premeditated murder.
Okay.
And that the methods of cancer treatment today effectively closes the door on a cure. A German doctor said that to sell chemotherapy as a therapy is most likely the biggest deceit in the history of medicine. So that's the tall and short of chemotherapy and cancer. Let's talk about radiation and radiotherapy. So blasting cancer cells with radiation stops them from growing and multiplying while it damages every other cell in its path. And it also sets in motion a cascade of negative physiological effects that can persist for multiple generations. So yay, let's irradiate the fuck out of our cells so we can pass this on for generations. Today, up to 60% of cancer patients receive radiotherapy as part of their treatment schedules, and most of them are never fully aware of the risks involved with exposure to ionizing radiation. X-rays were first discovered in 1895 by a German named Wilhelm Röntgen. In 1901, he was awarded with the Nobel Prize for his discovery, and ironically, a couple of years later, both he and his wife died from cancer caused by X-ray exposure. Hey, let's get a Nobel Prize for discovering something that kills us. With the advent of a machine that could produce X-rays, suddenly the medical industry had an impressive new way to destroy cells, and it was put to use on cancer. However, by 1922, over 100 radiologists and many others working in the medical industry had died from cancer caused by X-rays, and yet the ignorance continues. In the 1920s, portable X-ray devices became widely available at shoe stores, so customers could see the bones in their feet to determine which shoes were the right fit. At its peak, there were 10,000 shoe-fitting X-ray fluoroscopes in use. By the 1970s, the incidence of foot cancer had spiked so dramatically the shoe-fitting fluoroscopes were banned. After World War II, every physician in America was urged to have an X-ray fluoroscope in their office, and no examination was considered complete unless patients were fluoroscoped. They flaunted their fancy fluoroscopes to patients as a source of entertainment, and the doctor, who is now deceased, said this was a combination of ignorance and arrogance. It seems society was obsessed with technology in much the same way we are today with computers, cell phones, and other gadgets that still cause cancer. So radiotherapy versus cancer. During the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986, massive amounts of radioactive isotopes billowed up into the atmosphere before raining down on most of Europe. The largest mortality study on the Chernobyl disaster to date concluded that between 1986 and 2004, the radioactivity released by this event caused 985,000 deaths from cancer. Over the course of a month, the tumor gets more than 40,000 MSVs and the surrounding healthy tissue as much as 20,000 MSVs. That is 5 times the fatal dose experienced by Chernobyl workers. So a patient that goes in with cancer gets 5 times the fatal dose of Chernobyl.
Okay. Nobody ever knew that.
No. In other words, if radiotherapy doses weren't spread out over the course of a month or longer, every patient receiving it would die instantly.
Okay. Wow, that's a first one.
So far, the evidence suggests that at best, radiotherapy does not improve survival of breast cancer patients at best, and at worst, it is killing cancer patients more quickly than they would have died without it. The story is the same for lung cancer and radiation therapy. Dr. Ralph Moss wrote a book called The Cancer Industry that blew the whistle on the industry, and he stated that the official cancer mortality statistics are being intentionally manipulated in order to make it appear like cancer treatments are better than they actually are. Since radiotherapy damages all organs and systems of the body, including the brain, heart, liver, kidneys, thyroid, immune system, and it also impairs the healing process, there are endless ways its side effects can eventually kill a person. But the thing is, it's the same thing. They don't connect it. It's the same thing as a shock therapy. They don't connect the abuse of people with the economic model. They're not connecting the death of patients with the radiation they receive. Total disconnect. One of the most common ways radiation kills you is heart disease. So what Dr. Moss was referring to was the fact that if a patient receives radiotherapy, then has a heart attack and dies a week, month, or even years later, their cause of death will be deemed a heart attack rather than a cancer death due to treatment failure. They're not making they're not connecting. They're deliberately disconnecting it. And so the public never finds out how unsuccessful radiation therapy actually is. In 1993, Texas researchers from the Anderson Cancer Center in Houston questioned the validity of official government cancer mortality statistics by examining non-cancer deaths of 470,000 cancer patients. They found that 27% of patients who were reported dead for reasons other than cancer had died within a year after diagnosis, suggesting they were probably killed by their treatment, and this excess was caused by the treatment of cancer. So in other words, cancer treatments are less effective than we're told. To this day, mainstream theory states that radiation kills cancer cells by directly damaging DNA. However, in 1992, Harvard researchers discovered something that called the entire theory into question. When a cell is irradiated, something is emitted by the injured cell that transfers the same damage to non-irradiated cells, a term called bystander effect. This effect was demonstrated by researchers in Ontario in 2006 when they irradiated rainbow trout and then placed them in water-filled containers with non-irradiated fish. 2 days later, they discovered that the damage had been transferred from the irradiated fish to the non.
Okay.
So by putting fish that had been x-rayed into a tank with fish that had not been x-rayed, the non-x-rayed fish now had the same damage.
Okay.
This has been demonstrated in animals and in humans and plants. So what is the chemical messenger released by the irradiated cells that causes the bystander effect? Nitric oxide. And if you pay attention on YouTube to all the gurus, the breathwork gurus, they are all promoting breathwork that increases nitric oxide in your body, because it's being hailed as the greatest thing since sliced bread, but it actually causes cancer. And it's the one and only ingredient in Viagra. So nitric oxide effects include breaks in DNA, cell death, inflammation, and cancer. You can lower nitric oxide levels with methylene blue because it switches off the bystander effects and halts the self-perpetuating cycle of stress and damage. Interestingly, the effects of ionizing radiation appear to be indistinguishable from estrogen. And since estrogen rapidly elevates levels of nitric oxide in the body, lowering estrogen is probably a more fundamental way to interrupt bystander effects. Which, with this, takes me to the fact that 500 years ago, Germany said we need to put hops in our beer. No beer can be brewed without hops, and hops is the most estrogenic plant on the face of the earth. So, was it an intention 500 years ago to deliberately cause cancer with beer drinking? So when any part of the body is exposed to ionizing radiation, even at the low doses commonly used in medical x-rays, nitric oxide mediated bystander effects transfers the damage to unexposed body parts, and it goes beyond that. In 2010, researchers from Texas discovered that millimeter waves, a much less intense form of radiation that's often used at airport security checkpoints, can also induce bystander effects. So when you go through TSA and damaging ourselves. In 2013, a researcher found that microwave and even extra low frequency or ULF radiation, the kind emitted from cell phones and other wireless devices, both induce nitric oxide synthesis. And there is abundant evidence within the scientific literature associating cell phone use with cancer, brain tumors, mouth cancer, lymphoma, breast cancer, and eye cancer. Dr. Moss, the whistleblower, had a brain cancer specialist sit in his living room and say that he would never take radiation if he had a brain tumor. So Dr. Moss asked him, but you send people for irradiation? And he said, of course, because I'd be drummed out of the hospital if I didn't. And he wouldn't be able to make money if he didn't cause the death of people. Does early detection save lives? Because it's the big thing about early detection, right? The big deal. So like all businesses, the cancer industry requires a steady flow of customers in order to generate revenue. The way it accomplishes this is by popularizing the idea that detecting and treating cancer in its early stages improves survival, thereby scaring people into undergoing screening tests, which make them a shit ton of money. Early detection saves lives is a marketing strategy to motivate people who have no signs or symptoms of cancer to undergo regular screening for cancer. If early detection and treatment do in fact save lives, then it would be a righteous proposal. But the thing is that in order for it to be beneficial, the early treatment must be effective, and we've just proved that it's not. So let's talk about some of these screening tests. Number one, for men, the PSA test, prostate cancer screening. For men, the road to being diagnosed with prostate cancer begins with the blood test called the PSA test. A urologist might claim that a PSA test is an accurate way to detect prostate cancer. However, when we take a closer look, we come face to face with an uncomfortable reality. PSA cannot diagnose cancer, just like the PCR test cannot diagnose COVID. The doctor who discovered the antigen the PSA test for in 1970 calls the widespread use of the PSA test a public health disaster. He reveals in his book, The Great Prostate Hoax, that the antigen, a protein secreted by the prostate, is not cancer specific. In other words, the antigen is secreted by all prostates, healthy or with cancer. So to use this test for the antigen, to screen for the antigen, just makes no sense, because the prostate secretes that antigen, whether it's got cancer or not. So if a man has his PSA levels tested, they may end up being 4 or higher, and he will then be referred to a urologist for a biopsy, which is the next step on the assembly line towards radiotherapy or surgical removal of the prostate. PSA levels are increased by exercise, ejaculation, and everyday stress. So this makes this test, the PSA test, the coin toss. A urologist said that if you could biopsy a man according to whether he has blue eyes, green eyes, or prostate cancer and get the same result on the PSA test. So it just makes no sense. So a man might have a PSA of 5 and have cancer, and another one might have a PSA of 11 and be cancer-free. A researcher conducted a study of the PSA test and said it indicates nothing more than the size of the prostate gland. Researchers have found that prostate cancer mortality was actually increased in screened and pre-tested men. So they're actually inducing prostate cancer by pre-screening. Another study of the radical prostatectomy surgery showed that the surgery does not significantly reduce prostate cancer mortality. Despite this evidence, seductive celebrity-endorsed marketing campaigns pushing prostate cancer awareness continue luring men in to have their PSAs tested. And once the money train begins to roll, it cannot be stopped, or it can be very difficult. So the prostate gland, aren't you happy to know, Julian, that your prostate gland is at the epicenter of a worldwide $1 trillion industry, and the PSA test is its kingpin?
I'm trying to keep my ass safe. It's kind of difficult.
Yeah. So if the test were made irrelevant, an industry would crumble. As a consequence of using the PSA to detect prostate cancer, as many as 85% of men diagnosed with the disease don't have anything that will ever kill or even harm them at all. Yet most end up receiving unnecessary cancer treatment. During a prostate biopsy, a urologist will stick a big needle through a man's rectal wall into his prostate gland 6 to 12 times to get tissues for examination. And it's well established that biopsies suppress the immune system and actually promote cancer metastasis. The biopsy can also cause rectal bleeding, erectile dysfunction, and more. The two most common complications associated with having the prostate gland irradiated are removed are urinary incontinence and erectile dysfunction. Despite the fact that PSA tests cannot detect prostate cancer, and the extraordinary risk of a man having his sexuality and dignity stolen as a consequence of the test, almost 66% of men who undergo the PSA test are not even aware they've had it done. Their doctors simply do it as a routine part of the physical without their consent, or even telling them the implications of it. This is why I just am not going to doctors anymore. I'm just not.
Mm-hmm.
We can all learn how to be our own doctors.
Totally.
So let's move on to mammography. First introduced in the 1970s, mammography provides no mortality benefit, meaning it doesn't cause a reduction in breast cancer mortality. Over the course of 10 mammograms, women in the US have been between 58 to 77% chance of being falsely diagnosed with breast cancer. So although the PSA test and the mammography both fail to achieve their intended purpose of prolonging life, the PSA test involves only a blood sample, while mammography exposes patients to damaging ionizing radiation. The radiation a woman receives from the mammogram is 1,000 times more than from a chest X-ray. Since the early 1950s, scientific research has indicated repeatedly that low doses of radiation and X-ray are harmful to people. Not only are low doses of ionizing radiation enough to cause cancer, but low doses can actually be more harmful than larger ones, because accumulated radiation exposure from medical diagnostics is the main cause of over 50% of cancer deaths, 60% of heart disease deaths, and over 80% of breast cancer deaths in the US. So low dose ionizing radiation causes more damage than it does good. Despite evidence showing that surgical removal of one or both breasts results in increased tumor recurrences and higher mortality, we're still allowing doctors to cut our boobs off. So men are going in to get their prostates cut out and wear diapers for the rest of their lives, and we women are going in to get our boobs cut off.
Yeah. Put it that way, it's ridiculous.
Do we really dislike ourselves that much? Rather than saving lives, the widespread implementation of prostate and breast cancer screening has only enhanced the amount of men and women diagnosed and treated for cancer. This means people are frequently told they have cancer when they don't, and are frequently treated aggressively for diseases that they don't have. Dr. James Watson, the man who discovered DNA, said in 1976, the American public is being sold a nasty bill of goods about cancer. Another doctor said, we're going to look back at this century and cry as one of the most barbaric periods in human history. It's going to be called the Dark Ages of Medicine. The bottom line is many cancers are not even harmful. There's a type of thyroid cancer that isn't really a cancer. The tumors never actually produce symptoms or any problems at all for the people who go untreated. However, if you get diagnosed with this, quote, not cancer, non-cancer, and see a surgeon, the guidelines demand that the surgeon takes out your thyroid. So let's stop here for a minute and add AI to this. Now, AI gives you a checklist, and the surgeon or the doctor has to follow the checklist if they want to continue to get paid by the hospital. Or the not the hospital, they get paid by insurance companies. So AI is going to promote even more stupid diagnoses and kill people unnecessarily. Because it doesn't allow the surgeon or the doctor to think outside the box. It gives them a decision-making tree, and if they don't follow that, they don't make money.
Yeah.
So, the most astounding thing about the worldwide trillion-dollar prostate cancer industry is that even without treatment, almost no men diagnosed with prostate cancer will die from prostate cancer. So no man diagnosed with prostate cancer will die from prostate cancer.
Okay.
Studies show that the survival rate of untreated prostate cancer in men is 90%. Another study shows that all of the men diagnosed each year with prostate cancer, their lifetime risk of death from the cancer is only 3%, making it a 97% chance of surviving. Whereas if you take chemo, you have a 98% failure rate. Because of the misuse of a simple test, millions of men have been shelling out $20,000 to $50,000 or more for treatments that have left them impotent and having to wear diapers, all to treat a cancer that was never a threat. There is a type of cancer, or a type of breast cancer called DCIS. And between the years 1983 and 2000, there was a 500% increase in women diagnosed with them. Many of whom underwent damaging and unnecessary surgical procedures. And in similar fashion to prostate cancer, virtually no woman diagnosed with DCIS will die of DCIS if their cancer is left untreated. A growing body of experiments conducted by forward-thinking scientists showed that when we avoid harming the body with destructive treatments, many cancers may ultimately undergo spontaneous regression or the complete disappearance of cancer in the absence of treatment. When people aren't being scared to death and rushed into treatment by their doctors, rates of spontaneous regression can be seen as high as 7% in kidney cancer, 15% in melanoma or skin cancer, and up to 20% with lymphoma. And some studies have shown higher rates of spontaneous regression of cancer. A two-time Nobel Prize winner said, everyone should know that the war on cancer is largely a fraud. Hippocrates said, it is better not to apply any treatment in case of occult cancer, for if treated, the patients die quickly, but if not treated, they hold out for a long time. And Paracelsus said, it is from nature that disease comes, and from nature comes the cure, not from physicians. So that's it. That's the crimes of cancer.
That's one major card issue player in this different circle of players that are playing humanity.
Yeah.
Right? Medical sovereignty is one of the main pillars of the full sovereignty, of which there are many other pillars. And this was dive into one of those, into very precise, concise information about this specific industry and how it's an example for everything that is like that,
Well,
everything else. And so will we be covering in something else, going into something else
yeah, we're
next
going
week?
to go into the light side of things. Next week, we're going to start looking at free societies or truly democratic societies that
Okay.
existed long before colonization.
Oh wow. Okay. So that's good. Venus rising now. Uh,
What?
that's amazing. It's like
Yeah,
a Venus rising. It's going to be near the times of Venus coming up as a morning star.
yeah.
Okay, with that said, we'll leave you folks with that in mind and expecting to see you next week. Please let us know that you've liked this, and any comments are very welcome all the time. So with that being said, we'll see you next week, same time. Same time, no changes in the time, okay?
Right. No changes.
Okay, so bye bye. Warm blessings to everyone and lots of love here from Aloha Nida Living. See you soon next time.